Welcome to the Temple Health and Bioscience District's November Lunch and Learn webinar. Today we have Karen Gordesky here to talk about how to reach your goals by starting at the end and working your way backwards to develop a plan for success. So if you're looking for ways to improve efficiencies, clinical outcomes, and patient satisfaction, you're in for a treat with her presentation today. Karen has more than 30 years of experience in sales, negotiating, sales management, contract management, client relations, and marketing in both the medical device and diagnostic industries. She has a proven track record of assessing client needs and developing practical business solutions both internally and in the field. Before we get started, I just want to mention really quickly that we do have a YouTube channel now. So if you go to the Temple Health and Bioscience District channel on YouTube, you can find all of our recorded presentations. So if you feel like you missed something, you can just pop in there and watch it again. And also feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. So if you're here in person, just raise your hand, or if you're tuning in online, just drop your questions into the question box on your control panel, and Karen will address those throughout the presentation. But without further ado, thank you for being here today, and the floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you, Kelsey. I really want to thank the Temple Health and Bioscience District for inviting me here to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. I see startup companies that don't have a good sales strategy that can potentially fail, or they certainly make it a lot harder for them to succeed. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you all about that. My goals today are to get you to think about your marketing and sales strategy early in your developmental process. It will provide you some focus and some direction that you may need, because you might have a really good idea, but your baby may not be as pretty as you think it is. It may need a nose job. Regardless of your exits, I want you to consider your exit strategy too. I know so many people that just figure they're going to get to the end and somebody's going to buy them. And that may or may not happen. But regardless of what your exit strategy is, the information in a very general sense will provide some appropriate developmental direction, some focus, and actually increase your value to prospective investors, to prospective partners, and to any buyers if you have that. To frame our discussion, I'd like to begin with a story that I read in a little blog a couple weeks ago about a company named Driver. Driver was a San Francisco company that launched in September of 2018 with big name backers and a goal to use technology to transform the clinical trial recruitment and matching process for their cancer patients. Their business model was to charge cancer patients $3,000 to get the patient's tumor sequenced and then match it with a clinical trial. These patients would not only pay $3,000 up front, but $20 a month in a subscription fee. This was all paid for by the patient, so it was direct business to consumer, which you hear a lot of in the industry today. Per news reports, Driver raised somewhere between $90 and $100 million in venture capital. Unfortunately, 2 months later, the company skidded to a halt. It had to lay off all of its employees and shut down. The question is, why did that happen? So as we go through this presentation, I want you to kind of think about Driver and think about, what did they do wrong? And I think, nothing is ever that simple, but I think there are some simple answers for Driver. So let's start first, if we can get this to move. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do in the first slide that comes up is let's define some terms. And the first thing we're going to define is, what is a medical device? A medical device is intended to be used for the diagnosis of a disease or other conditions and the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease to affect the structure or any function of the body which does not achieve its intended purposes by chemical action or being metabolized. This, of course, includes diagnostics also. for the purposes of our discussion today, it will also include pharma. Here we go. So I just want you to be aware, remember what a medical device is. When you do go to the FDA, it's important for you to have your device classified. Is it a class 1 low risk, a class 2 medium risk, or a class 3 life-sustaining high risk? Why is that important? Well, it has impact on your sales and marketing strategy, your sales training, your sales pricing, the claims you can make, how you must support them, and also your customer training. Finally, I want to make a comment. As you go through the FDA approval process, you have a choice on many devices on a 510K process or a PMA, a pre-market approval process. A 510K process says that you are equivalent to what's in the market currently. And as you go to your customers, they are going to ask for a copy of your FDA approval paperwork, so they're going to know exactly if you're 510K or PMA approved. If you're 510K approved and you say you're equivalent to what's on the market, as you negotiate out your pricing, your customers are going to say, I'm not paying anything more than what I currently pay for the equivalent device. Why should I? I don't care that yours is new. It does the same thing. You've proven it does the same thing. It's not unique in any way because you have a 510K. If you have a PMA, you could potentially make a case for a higher payment from the end user. So something for you just to keep in mind. PMA process, of course, is a lot more costly too, but just be aware of what you're facing when you go into the market. So what turns the cycle of life in any product that you bring to market? Here you go. You have this brilliant idea. It's burning like the brightest light in the world. You go through development launch. So you go through R&D and you go through your clinicals and you go through production, manufacturing projections, and you finally want to launch. And somewhere in there, you might think about marketing, collaterals, and what you're going to take to people. And you might think about how you actually want to deliver it to the end user through a sales force of some kind. So it gets delivered to the end user, the patient, it's used in the patient. At that point in time, then the hospital or the clinic or the end user will bill and get reimbursement. That can take up to 120 days, typically 90 to 120 days. And then you're going to get a payment. So again, you're probably looking at 120 days. It's not usually very, I bill and next week I get paid. You just have to realize that there is that lag. There's ways to shorten it, but you have to realize that. And then you come up with a payment. You should be calculating your profitability, and you may come up with new ideas to start this whole process again and again. In each step, there is money that has to be accounted for, how you spend it, how much profit you have. Every point in this particular cycle has money behind it, driving it. You have need for money. So you have to be very aware of the finances and how the money flows to be able to understand how to deliver your product. It may not sound pretty, and it may sound, you're not going to, how do I want to say this? We all want to create something better for patients. Unfortunately, money is a driver in this whole thing. As you look at where the money is and why people make a decision, what are the reasons that your end user is looking for to incorporate your product? Well, CMS, HHS came up with the triple aim of medicine. Anytime you want to introduce a new product, you have to be able to improve clinical outcomes. Why would somebody want to change a product they're currently using that they're happy with if there are no improvements in clinical outcomes? There are studies that say that to change inventory, training, that kind of stuff costs upward up to $40,000 or more in a hospital to make changes. So a $2,000 a year savings is not anything that's going to get anybody excited. So what do we mean by improved clinical outcomes? Well, you could do things like lowering infection rates. You might have a less invasive physical procedure. You might have lower drugs or needs for pain medicine. Those are kinds of things when you think of with clinical outcomes. Sometimes it becomes hard, or when I bring this up, as you do your R&D or your clinical trials, you should be shooting for one of these triple aim goals and see if you can fashion studies that support the clinical outcomes. Because people don't want or will not buy you coming in to tell them this works better than what you're using. They want to see data, real hard data of what that means. And you're going to continue even after launch to be able to gather data that demonstrate that you have improved clinical outcomes. The second thing in the AAA of medicine aim of medicine is improving patient satisfaction. That's a little fuzzier to define, for sure. But if you do have lower infection rates, lower pain, less drugs, faster recovery time, shorter surgery time, ASCs, ambulatory surgery centers, where patients go in and leave the same day, that usually makes patients happy. If there's less follow-up, less ways that they have to take a patient back to the doctor's office for follow-up, and that maybe you can do things over the internet, whatever, that makes patients happier. So anything that you can think of to improve patient satisfaction should be something that you should be looking at. And finally, let's talk about improving efficiencies. When we talk about improving efficiencies, what that does do is it should save money. And again, if you're the same things that we've talked about before, if you've lowered the number of rehabilitation visits that a patient might have to do, if you can save steps in the OR, or you can save steps at the bedside, if your product replaces 2 or 3 other products that are currently being used, you have to think about what those efficiencies are. And in every one of these cases, you should, during your R&D process, doing your clinical trials, you should be documenting and verifying this over and over again, because you can't make claims out in the field that you can't go back and verify. That can get you into a whole host of troubles. So what that rolls up to is your value proposition. You need to be able to take these 3, and maybe there's only one that really applies to your particular product, but you need to be able to take these and put it together in something that will relate to your audience, relate to your customer. You must be able to walk your customer through the benefits of the features that you have. And you can't discern that they're going to be able to figure it out by themselves, that you just hand them a piece of paper and they're going to read it and go, the light turns on. No, you have to help them walk through it. You may have 10 things and there may only be 2 things that make a difference to that particular customer. But incorporating this triple aim is essential into your research and clinical trials. It will save you money in the long run, and it will help you develop a lot of trust in your product from the very beginning when you launch it. This, I'd like to thank Elisa Maldonado-Hormitz for this slide. This is the reimbursement impact on the medical device industry. I talked a little bit about money a few slides back. Where does money come from? Well, it comes from a lot of places, but the truth is that reimbursement is the biggest single factor for watching how money goes when you're in the field. You need to understand where your product fits in reimbursement from the insurances and from the government. How is it captured? Because all of these products are captured under the reimbursement. So under R&D, you have to understand what features that you have that will be paid for and what won't be paid for. For the next 3, the clinical trials, regulatory, and the reimbursement arrows that you see, that's the triple aim that we just talked about. So you have to understand what the variables are for the payers, what if they will pay 510K, what they're currently paying somebody else that's 510K approved, or if it's PMA, if you have to get a special pass through from insurance companies so you can charge more because of the uniqueness of your product. And also we get to clinical and cost efficiencies. You need to have to understand what are the efficiencies, because that does, if the hospital can enhance their reimbursement, if they can make more money on the same cases, that's certainly a win for them. Marketing and sales, the claims that you make have to be verified and documented so you can get reimbursed. You can't go off the reservation here and make things up. So those are the kinds of things that you have to remember about reimbursement. Early in the process, what I would recommend is that you contact a reimbursement specialist and tell them what your product is, have them bring back the specific codes so you can understand where it fits and what the average reimbursement for those codes are. Know your market. When you think about commercialization, this is early on. You need to test your value proposition with real customers. Even before you develop or while you're developing, I would recommend that you go to 20 to 30 customers throughout the country in different markets. Not all the ones that are in your backyard. You need to go to the East Coast, the West Coast, some movers and shakers, some hospitals, some ASCs, wherever you think the potential exists. Go with a list of questions. You're not going to sell your product. You're going to find out what they need. You're going to give them maybe a rundown on your product and see if there's any interest in that kind of product and what would be the most important part of that. You're also going to you'll develop a SWOT analysis. What's that? A strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis, so you can understand your market. You're going to find out who your business competitors are. Is it J&J? Is it Medtronic? Is it some little companies? Are there any competitors in the marketplace? And with that, the product competitive market analysis. You want to know what products are out there, how much market share do they have, what do customers like about this product, why do they use this product? This is all very valuable information that you need to, one, develop your product, but also to be able to go to investors. You're going to have that research. At that point, you're going to ask them what triggers a customer purchase. How do they do this? How do they take it through their system? Generally, it's a rare instance anymore when one person can make a decision in an organization. It generally has to go through committees. You have to pull together the appropriate information. And unfortunately, it's rare when you get to present the product to the committee. So you will have to pull together a lot of data, put it together in an organized fashion, so somebody from, let's say, the hospital can present it, or it can be something that the customer can review on their own basis. So as you talk to these people, you'll determine your customer base and what's appropriate for that customer base. If you have any intellectual property, any patents, or what makes them unique from your competitors, what do your competitors have that you have to work around? You need to know all these little things and make sure that your R&D department knows about it, the people that are putting together your clinical trials, so they know how to help you fashion that you get the most out of the product. And as I said before, be able to follow the money, know what's going on with reimbursement, keep up with it during your development. Usually takes 4 to 5 years to develop a product for market. So you want to make sure that you are keeping up. Don't do it one time and think it's going to be the same 4 or 5 years from now. It's going to change, and you want to make sure you're up to it. You also want to look at current market pricing. The one thing that I can tell you is if you look at current market pricing, if anything over the next few years, we see downward pressure, continued downward pressure. So when you look at your pricing strategy and profitability analysis, which is something you need to do very early in the process, you might see the current market pricing for a product is $100. That's what the average is. And if it costs you $80 to manufacture it, I'm going to tell you, don't go. it's a no-go unless you can really get that profitability, or you can get your production costs down. You will end up losing money and you will fail. And I also want to make a comment here on pricing strategy. I've talked to companies, and what they've told me is they want to be the low-cost provider. It's a bad strategy. It's a failing strategy. Why? If you're going up like against companies like a Medtronic or a J&J Smith, and it doesn't even have to be a big company. If you're going against somebody, first of all, you have to understand the inertia is against you. If you're, just a little bit less expensive. And if you think these companies are going to lose business for a couple dollars, think again. So don't use that as your pricing strategy. You need to understand the current market delivery method. So if you look at your competitors and they have direct sales forces, there's a reason they have direct sales forces. Do they have indirect sales forces? Do they use distributors? Do they use sales agents? You kind of have to get a feel for how this market is set up. And then finally, as you come out, you might want to start to talk to people about anticipating your market response. Because if your product does make a splash, if your product does have significant impact, the market will respond to you. It may take them a little while, but you need to know and try to be prepared on what's going to happen in the market. So for the next slide, we will talk a little bit about your business model. So we're talking a little bit more about effective marketing. What methods to reach your market? What are you doing? I have seen companies do advertising, general advertising, to watch out for this new product that's coming. Not a lot of claims or anything, just sort of pre-teasing the market. Yes, that even happens in the medical market. We have a lot of ways to reach end users that we never had before. Certainly, there's the traditional collateral feet on the street methods, but we have telemarketing, we have telemedicine, you can use the internet, YouTube, all kinds of ways to reach customers that we had that can be pretty cost effective that we haven't had before. So you might want to bring a marketing expert in to talk to you about, okay, let's figure out the best way to reach our market, who we have to reach, why we have to reach them, and what's going to make the biggest amount of difference. How will you deliver it to the market itself? What's your sales and delivery strategy? Well, are you going to deliver directly from your warehouse? Are you going to work with a distributor and have them store it in their warehouse? Or a sales agent? Who's going to do the billing? Who's going to do the collections? All these little details that are an enormous details that cost a lot of money. Sorry about that. That's when you have friends that call you when they're not supposed to. So you want to, you have to understand what the value is of each one of these sales forces. I think you also have to understand that you have a responsibility in each one of these choices to manage the expectations, to set up the goals, to monitor what they're doing, to make sure that they're doing appropriate sales claims, that they're not overselling the product, and that you support them. Support them when they need help with a customer, so the customer has a little bit more understanding of what's going on. Just because you've passed this on to someone else doesn't mean that you have no more responsibility for what they say in the field, how they present it, and who they present it to. You also have to decide how closely you're going to hold pricing. So you have to understand the financial impact on each choice. And as far as pricing is concerned, you want to make sure you've set up a parameter of, pricing matrix that is followed. when you also understand the financial impacts, you're going to look at how much does it cost you to create sales collaterals, who's going to pay for them, and that can be sheets, it can be advertisements, it can be DVDs that you hand out, those kinds of things. There's a cost of training your sales force and customers. Even if you're using a distributor or an indirect sales force, you have a responsibility to physically go in and train them. You have to make sure they understand what your product is, how to present it. Not to say that you don't tweak this as you get field information back, but it is your responsibility to make sure they know what claims they can make, what claims they can't make, and that you'll be monitoring that, and what customers you think they should go after. There is a cost of doing business. There's different things that you will find out when you do your initial interviews with your customers, but packaging is a huge issue. Are you barcoding? Do you need to barcode? If you're going to use a distributor, packaging has to be in certain formats and certain sizes so they can put it in their warehouse and electronically or robotically pick up the packages and move them around. So you have to understand each choice, how it's going to impact that particular sales force. You will have to build the appropriate internal sales structure to drive and support the business. So often when people put together a some kind of business financial software, they look at finances alone. You're going to have places in for each customer to define the customer, what kind of customer it is, what kind of pricing, why they get that pricing, what buying group are they a member of. You can't retrofit that back. It's much easier to do that, and that will help you. You'll need that for finance, and you'll need that for actually building models for production, be able to scale up. Pricing strategy, I put this on a separate thing or separate item because there are people that specialize in pricing strategy. Pricing strategy is not whatever you need to price this at for this customer is what you should do. Pricing strategy should be well thought out. If you think you're going to be working with the government, with the Department of Defense, with DOD, you have to be aware of the rules around the DOD and realize that your pricing strategy could hinge on what you do with the DOD. Traditionally, people think that has to be the lowest price in the country. That's not entirely true. It has to be the lowest price or the best price for a customer of similar size to the DOD. And finally, let's talk about monitoring sales parameters. Sales parameters are things like, what does each customer generate? What do you expect them to generate? What will they generate? The price that they have versus reimbursement, if there's any regional trends, if there's any seasonal trends, the type of customer. So, all of these different parameters, and certainly monitoring, I'm going to say it again, monitoring your profitability at every step of the way. I'd peel it down. I'd look at my company. I'd look at a region. I'd look at a sales rep. I'd look by hospital and look at a profitability and see what kind of story that you actually see out there. And finally, you need to be aware of the federal rules and regulations governing commerce today. You're not selling shoes, as pretty as they are, but you have to be aware of the Stark Amendments, Sunshine Acts. You have to be aware of anti-kickback statutes that certainly affect your clinical trials, but affects going out and actually selling in the field. You have to be aware of the accounting principles of Sarbanes-Oxley. You have to be aware of the Robeson-Pateman Acts, which governs how you price distributors. You can't give this distributor special pricing because you just like them better. It has to be built around volume, and that's the pricing they get, and that's just the way it is. So you need a little bit of legal counsel here to make sure that you aren't violating any rules and regulations. Now, chances are, as a very small company, nobody wants to come after you because there's really nothing to get out of you. However, if you grow or if somebody big buys you, you have a you're going to reduce your value in the marketplace if you have a lot of potential violations, because the government will come after them or come after J&J as soon as they buy them. By you, sorry. So you're going to have to always have a constant focus on your market. You're going to have to continually monitor your value proposition. You'll continue to get in data, support your clinical data. You're going to have to see if it's changing. You're going to have to see, as the market change, does your product still have value in the market? And that's not a 20-year deal. That can be a 2-year deal. So you stay close to your customer needs, their pain points, the market response, and changing reimbursement. Reimbursement changes like once a year, but there are clues on what's going on throughout the year that you hear if you're reading up on what CMS is doing. And that will help you position yourself for the next year. You have to understand your customer buying process and see if it's changing. Too often you think that, oh, I'll just go to the physician and the physician will say what he or she wants. Keep in mind, over 50% of the physicians that are out there today are hospital employees. Very different than 3 years ago. They will buy off what the hospital has under contract. They will buy off of that contract. So you may get the physician to want to use the product, but you're going to have to go back to the hospital or the clinic or the ASC and do a contract with them. Maybe you'll have to participate in a request for proposal, and you have to understand what an RFP is, how you respond, how you position yourself. And then finally, you'll probably have to go, even if you have a contract, even if you have a big contract with something like HCA, you'll have to go to a value analysis committee at each hospital out there. Because for a hospital to change their inventory or their procedures, they want to know what's on their particular shelf. So keep in mind, a contract, everybody thinks that the contract is the end all. The way I look at it is the contract is the ticket to the dance. All it does is it gets you in the door. It's still your responsibility working through your sales agents to sell. Why do I bring this all up now? As you create, as you go through R&D and your clinical trials, you need to be thinking of all these steps, because now you're going to figure out what's unique and important for you to put on a request for proposal from a hospital. What can you put on there that's really going to make a difference? What are you going to put that a value analysis committee is going to say, oh yeah, that's important to us. Oh yeah, we need to make changes for this to come through. It could be something as simple as everything is barcoded, and you can do electronic invoicing and electronic billing, invoicing, and payments. How silly does that sound? That sounds very, you do that all the time on everything else, but it's something new in medicine. There are studies, this is an older study, that it's like $150 to $250 to write a PO and pay a PO in a hospital. I saw something at the University of Mississippi. It took 16 people to handle that. That's where the cost comes in. If somehow you can go and show where they could take a manual procedure and automate it, you're golden. You now bring real value to the mechanics of that operation, of that hospital, and save them money and time. So you have to understand all of those things and keep focused and keep up to date and see what's going on. What are your competitors doing in this market? So you have a strategy around successful contract implementation. Again, the contract only gives you a ticket. You still have to go in and pull down all the claims that you made from your clinical trials, your FDA approval process, and be able to sell them. Finally, or one other key is to manage your price segments and profitability with your structure. Continue to monitor it, continue to monitor the flow, continue to monitor your profitability. Don't let it get out of hand. Just keep a monthly look at what's going on. You need to measure your performance versus expectations. Somewhere along the line, as you put together your sales plan, as you started in the beginning, as you talked to customers, you developed some ideas of how big the market actually is and how much you think you can capture of the market and how fast you can do that. Well, you might be wrong, and that's not necessarily bad. You might have to make adjustments, but you need to continue to measure your performance versus expectations. Find out why you either underachieved or overachieved. If you overachieved, that's not necessarily bad. It just may have been your expectations were way too low. But build on your successes and make revisions where you need to make revisions where you're underperforming. With all of this, the things that you started in the beginning on quality continue to go through. You need to maintain quality and customer service pre, during, and post sale. You need to have a very strong, robust internal structure to do that. That's whether you have a direct sales force, an indirect sales force, you're using a distributor, however you go to market, you need to be able to maintain your quality and customer service and have a good system, an automated system that you can pull down this data. People are going to ask you how many problems are there out there? What kind of problems have you had? And what have you done about that? The documentation is very important, and it'll make it easier if you ever have to go back to the FDA with problems. So, as one of my very first sales managers told me many years ago, you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. And that is your job as an entrepreneur. What we've talked about today is, in general, why you should have a sales process or be thinking about your sales in the very beginning. But there's other issues you want to remember that come out of this. You're going to build your inventory and your projections of market growth, and hopefully they will be more realistic if you understand your customer better, if you understand what you can actually do. We talked about maintaining that quality and customer service internal structure. Need a robust accounting system so you can pull out sales by customer, by IDN, integrated delivery network, by system. Right now, there's close to 5,000 hospitals in this country. There are more and more large systems, as evidenced by Baylor, Scott, and White. There are projections that within probably the next 5 years, there'll only be 20 or 25 major systems in the entire country. So you have to be able to roll up your sales by system so you know what's going on, and also pull it apart by hospital. Monitor how you're getting paid. It's great to sell products, but it's not really sold until you have dollars back in your account. And sometimes you have to get after customers to pay you. Always, always, always consider your end game. And by that is like, do you want to be the next Medtronic? Do you want to be a good middle-sized company? Do you want to be bought out by somebody? If you have a good sales plan, it really doesn't matter. You're worth more in the market. If somebody wants to buy you and you say, I've got this really rolling, as a negotiating strategy, I've got this really rolling, I'm going to be 100 million in 2 years or whatever it is. Now you're worth more. And if you can demonstrate that you have a plan to get you there. So like this little ugly baby that's really not so ugly, it needs love, understanding, and continued support. Because just because you think he's handsome doesn't mean everybody else is too. Finally, I want to say that while we've talked about sales strategy, as you start out as a company, this is not somebody that you have to hire full time. This is somebody that you can bring in and sit down in the beginning, maybe once a quarter for a half day, once a month for a couple hours, something like that. And as you get closer to launch, then you use those resources more. But this is not experience that you have to have at your door 100% of the time, because there's not anything for them to do. But you need them to provide focus, for them to remind you of what's going on in the market and make sure you're providing the appropriate touch points. If you're going out to talk to 20 or 30 customers, you might want to sit down one day, spend an hour or lunch, talk about, okay, what are the kind of questions we want to ask? What are the things we really need to know? And you also have other things that you pull in, but let's get a list of questions together. And then you keep checking up on those. Those become a basis that on a monthly or quarterly basis you continue to check up on. So let's talk a little bit about driver and why did driver fail? Here's my opinion for what it's worth. I don't know the details, and it's hard for the people that listen to just have a conversation for them to hear. But I think they went after a direct-to-consumer market. But there's one important thing that they really forgot. Cancer patients generally have very high expenses. So now they're asking them to pull $3,000 out of their pocket that their insurance is not going to pay for. The $20 a month is not, it could be pretty hard for some people, but $3,000 for them to start. That's a flawed model. Things that are not paid for in the medical industry are not going to succeed in any big way. The direct-to-consumer will only work if they would have gone to insurance companies first and had insurance companies actually buy into this. But I don't think they'd buy into it because it's not FDA approved. You know, it's sort of one of those kind of circles that go around. But I think it was a great idea that was flawed. And it was flawed because of the money. Any questions?
You know, maybe a comment. You mentioned the size of Baylor Scott & White now with the potential merger with Memorial Hermann. I mean, you're going from 50 hospitals to 75 hospitals. An individual hospital within our system can't just go out and do anything on its own. It is done at a system level. And you talked about, you know, getting those systems. And you're right. I think there'll be 20, 25 systems in the future, and maybe beyond that, just 4 or 5.
Yeah.
You know, so it is a real challenge to get those things in. And size matters. I mean, the purchasing power of Baylor Scott & White is just huge now.
Right. And what we found, at least this is what I've found before with systems, is that you get the contract with the system, but you still have to go and sell it to each individual hospital within the system because they already have things on their shelf that's approved. So this is why the contract is the ticket to the dance. It does not guarantee that you're going to get business. I've even, you know, you have to go to the value analysis committee at every hospital, and then they determine for their hospital, for their procedures. Well, the procedures are common, but for the way they work, that this will fit in there. I've even seen this when you have a sole source. You know, here's the biggest mistake salespeople make. They have a sole source. You get a sole source contract, and they want to go in and they say, you need to use this product. You have to use this product because we're a sole source and you got to buy it. And whoever they say it to, if they said it to me, I'd say the same thing. It's like, fat chance, buddy. You know, it's like, what you need to do is go in is like, we have a new contract. I understand it's a sole source, but I also understand that you have your own specific needs here. What do you need to know about this product to begin to even look at it? You know, so it's a softer, the medical market is not necessarily a hard sell market. You have to be really consistent and you have to be persistent, but you also have to be very sensitive of all of the people you're talking to and what their needs are.
Certainly helps if you have a physician champion.
It helps. Certainly helps. It's if they're a true champion, right, you know, right. You can get physician support, but in today's world, I can tell you in particular, Herman, who you are, Baylor Scott & White's going to merge with, they have a very unique system that is, you know, gain sharing. And if somebody buys off of contract, that person doesn't get penalized. The entire group of physicians that are in that gain sharing system gets penalized. So there's a lot of peer pressure on that particular, person or that physician to make it change. So there's all kinds of interesting ways that you have to understand. As one old boss told me more recently, is like when you see one contract, you've seen one contract. If you've seen one customer, you see one customer, because everybody has different things that's important to them. And you have to know that. Yes.
Can you explain gain sharing? What that is?
Do people know what gain sharing is? Gain sharing a few years ago was like almost illegal. But what gain sharing is hospitals are looking at ways to save money. And in the past, physicians would have their choice, and they didn't necessarily care about the money savings. To make saving a more, let's just say, a path that everybody looked in the same direction, they would give physicians, a group of physicians, a piece of the savings that they had. That was called gain sharing. They gained money, but they saved it. So at one time, it was not looked on with any favor. In today's world, it has to be transparent. Patients will see something about that. They'll see a statement. Most of them don't really understand what that statement is. Not that it's hard to understand, but it's just like, okay, fine. And it just has to be transparent. Not exactly how much money the doctors are making back or the people are making back, but the fact that it exists. And more and more and more hospitals and ASCs and clinics are doing gain sharing.
Today, I think we call it shared savings.
That's a better word.
Gain.
Yeah, you gain, so you shared savings. Okay,
Shared savings. Yes.
good question. Thank you. Any
That's a
other?
good question. So say you're 4 to 6 months out on either a new medical device or just a product. What's the first or the main thing you would focus on in your sales strategy?
I would build with what's your value proposition? What's your value proposition and what's the data that you have to support it? You should 4 to 6 months out. That should have been 2 years ago. But that's what you would be doing, value proposition. And then I'd be looking, somewhere along the line, you're looking at who your competitors are, how do they deliver it to the market, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. You should already be starting to realize where your soft market is, where the low-hanging fruit is, and then who do you want to go do this? A lot of times people think about hiring 1099s because it's like, well, I'll just pay them a commission for whatever they do. The problem with that is they have to make an enormous investment in time to make one sale. It's rare when you make one phone call and you make a sale. That's not necessarily a good salesperson. That's just a lucky salesperson on that particular day. So, the 1099, you're still going to have to provide that 1099 with the value proposition, the pricing strategy, all of those kinds of things. War Story company I worked for doesn't exist anymore. They got bought out by a bigger company. It was a good company. I set up a corporate accounts department. The day before, they were in spines and they did a new vertebral body. The day before launch, marketing came over to me because I was that head of contracting. They came over to me and said, what should we price this at? Wait a minute. There should be initial gating. It's like, do you even know if you're profitable? They said, well, what should we price it at? And I pulled out and I said, the average, I'll make up a number, but the average selling price for a device like this is $4,000, or whatever it was, $1,500, I don't know. And they said, well, it's new. And it's like, so what? Well, it's new. What was the approval? It was a 510K approval. You're not going to get more than other devices. Does this do something unique? Does it have a higher rate of fusion at a faster period of time? No, it works just like every other device. This isn't something you should do the day before you're going to do your market launch. You should have figured that out 2 years ago.
Let me just ask a question for my edification. You know, in this day and age of these big Medtronics or Stryker or something, if they're bringing a new product along, I mean, how successful are they versus a small independent entrepreneur sitting around this table trying to bring a product to fruition?
It depends. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really great question. The question was, if you're a small company and you're going up against the big company, the Strykers, the Medtronic, the J&Js of the world, you know, how can you be, if I can distill it down, how can you be more successful than they are? How do you compete with them? That's why you do a SWOT analysis and you talk to customers. You know, where are their weaknesses? You already know what their weaknesses are. The one thing that I can say, and it differs from each company, but a lot of these great big companies aren't too terribly nimble. And that is a strength for an entrepreneur. But to be nimble doesn't mean that you drop your price. You know, to be nimble doesn't mean that you just give everything away. I've seen small companies sign contracts and agree to things that they had no business or need to agree to just because they didn't want to stir anything, you know. But the big companies get caught up in legal and financial jargon. You know, you can kind of cut through some of that. You can make a decision faster. So I think products being equal, unfortunately, it's really hard to go against these great big companies, because what these companies can do is they can't bundle. That's illegal for them to bundle. They say, if you buy this product and this product, we'll give you this discount. But what they can do is a total volume discount. If you spend $1 million with me, I can give you this down. If you spend $2 million with me, I can give you this, you know, and they can ratchet it that way. So you pulling $100,000 out of that can impact their overall discount. That becomes very difficult for you to do. But if you've done your value proposition and you can show that your product gives them some efficiencies that override that difference, that you know, or gives them significant things like if you reduce pain significantly, you know from Medicare that hospitals now are judged on patient satisfaction. And one of the things that's on there is pain, successful pain management. And I think, and you can correct me on this one, it's something like if they have a bad score on that, it can cost them something like 2%, 1 or 2% of their total Medicare reimbursement, not that patient, but that's all Medicare patient reimbursement throughout the whole hospital. So you're talking millions of dollars potentially. Something like that you have proven in your clinical trials that is better than what the large companies have can make, you know, that can offset any kind of discount that they're going to get from those large companies. So you really have to think through what your clinical features and benefits are, and then realize that you only have a certain period of time. If you have IP that protects it or something like that, you certainly have a longer period of time.
And I just suspect some of these big companies, though, I mean, talking about a value proposition, they probably have multiple teams working on a value proposition versus an individual or two, you know. I mean, it's just.
They have multiple teams. Yeah, big companies do have multiple teams working on value propositions. But I'm going to also say that their size makes them clumsy. You know, I don't know any other way to. Probably the most nimble of the large ones that I see is Stryker. Stryker is very nimble, and they know how to respond faster than most people. They come up with some really creative ideas that are legal. You know, they have to be legal. You have to have good legal counsel on this in the field. But some of the other ones, and I've worked for them, they cannot respond fast to competition. Any other questions?
We have about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
One more question?
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
My question is, are there examples of products that have successfully transitioned from being consumer products to being, let's say, Medicare reimbursed, insurance company reimbursed? The product comes out as a consumer. Is that a disadvantage in terms of then maybe doing research and getting the demonstration of efficacy that then leads to Medicare reimbursement?
I'm not aware of any, but that doesn't mean that that didn't happen. I know somebody right now that has a supplement, and he wants to introduce it for hair, skin, and nails, but he wants to, he feels it has other applications and use the money that he makes from the consumer to drive the research that he has to do to take it through the FDA. But I think where you would have to start would, even if it was a consumer product, take it to the FDA and make sure that they just, they don't, what's the classification?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be classified.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Where's my friend Elisa when I need her? But could it happen? I'm sure there are. I'm just not thinking of one right now. I don't know if, I've talked to some people about exercise equipment, different types of exercise equipment, but I'm not sure how the FDA looks at that.
Thinking more about Medicare in terms of getting that.
Yeah. Don't know.
Like a consumer-based DME type product.
No, don't know. We can look up. I can maybe do a little bit of research on it if you give me your name, and then I'll see if I can find something for you. Be happy to look. Interesting question.
All right. Did we get all the questions answered? Okay, well, Karen's contact information is on here, so then this will be up on our YouTube channel, and we can send the presentation around if anybody wants to have those slides, so just let us know. But thank you so much for your time today.
It was my pleasure.
And just a quick reminder, we will not have a December webinar due to holidays, so we'll be back in January. So thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.